Hi, I'm Kenzie. Welcome back to my podcast. If you are just joining, welcome. Today we will be talking about my 10th Blue's Clues VHS, Stop, Look, and Listen. This VHS includes What Did Blue See? And What's That Sound? First, let's talk about What Did Blue See? This episode starts out with Steve not here. Well, actually, he was just on the ground, kneeling. He tells the viewer we look really different because to see us, he'd have to look up. To see Steve, we'd have to look down. Then Steve looked even lower. Things looked really different from way lower to the ground. Then Blue enters the scene. She tells us she saw something. The question was, what did Blue see? That's when Blue wanted to play Blue's Clues. But first, Steve had to get rid of the paw print. He pulled out a mirror for the paw print to see in. The reflection did what it did. Then Steve told the paw print it was time to play Blue's Clues, and it left. When Steve went to get his handy-dandy notebook, he noticed that side table drawer looked really close, and vice versa. He looks in the drawer and sees some cool things. And so the game Blue's Clues has begun. The viewer spotted the first clue, which is sticks. The clue looked different through the water. After the first clue was found, we see Blue looking through her kaleidoscope. The problem was Steve didn't know what they were looking at. Our job was to help him. We looked through the kaleidoscope and spotted blocks, books, a fishbowl with a fish, a globe, a plant, and a butterfly. Then the viewer spotted the second clue, which is a tree. After the second clue was found, it's mail time. Steve looked through the kaleidoscope and thought we got so much mail. Mailbox then tells Steve there was only one letter. He was right. The letter showed our friends guessing what was under the sheet. It was a lion. I'm telling you, things look really different depending on how you look at them. After mail time, Blue and Steve see their friend Squirrel on the computer. It turned out Squirrel heard someone calling her, but she doesn't know who. Blue skidoos into the computer to help her. Steve does too. Our job was to figure out who is yoo-hooing by asking what they can see from where they are. The first animal could see a slide and a seesaw, and everything is upside down. It was either the monkey, the bird, or the chipmunk. It was the monkey hanging from the monkey bars. The second animal could see a big red flower under a bench. It was either the caterpillar, the bee, or the inchworm. It was the inchworm underneath the bench. The final animal could see white flowers and orange goldfish swimming around in a pond. It was either the frog, the bird, or the duck. It was the bird on the bridge. After finding all the animals, Squirrel went home because her mom called. That's when the viewer spotted the third clue, which is eggs. That's also when Steve realized we had all three clues and it was time to sit in the thinking chair. It was time to think. We were trying to figure out what Blue saw, and our clues were sticks, a tree, and eggs. Steve thought, what if Blue was outside around a tree and looked up? She could have been around a tree that had sticks in it, and there were eggs in the middle of them. The viewer guessed correctly that Blue saw a bird's nest. At that point, Steve realized we just figured out Blue's Clues. After the celebratory song, Steve and Blue went outside to see the nest. Blue decided to look at it with her kaleidoscope. Steve did too. Then Squirrel comes to remind us that we helped her figure out who yoo-hooed in the park. Then something extraordinary happens. We hear hatching. Inside, the eggs were baby birds. Can you believe it? Blue found the nest of eggs and they just hatched. Steve thought it was so cool. After saying hello to the baby birds, it was time to say so long, but sing just one more song. Now let's talk about the episode as a whole. I feel like kids can learn a lot in this episode if they want to learn more about perspective. It's really cool to see things from different points of view. Plus, the three baby birds were so cute. All in all, it's a good episode. Now let's talk about What's That Sound? This episode starts out with Steve hearing something. He needed our ears to figure out what the sound was. We follow the sound to the bedroom. That's when Steve thought the keys were making the sound. It turns out it was not the keys. It was more of a ringing sound. As they got closer to the sound, it got louder. It turned out the sound was coming from the wind chime. Isn't that amazing? Steve and the viewer heard the wind chime all the way from the living room. Then Blue heard something else. The problem was Steve and the viewer didn't hear anything. The question was, what does Blue hear? That's when Blue wanted to play Blue's Clues. But first Steve had to get rid of the paw print. The wind carried it away. When Steve went to get his handy-dandy notebook, side table drawer told him to close his eyes and figure out the sound. It turned out it was her drawer opening, so Steve can reach in for his notebook and start playing Blue's Clues. And so the game Blue's Clues has begun. Then Steve hears another sound. He went to go see what it was. It turned out it was just a drippy faucet. That's when the viewer spotted the first clue, which is drops of water. After turning off the faucet and drawing the first clue, Shovel and Pail are heard giggling. Steve goes outside to see what's going on. It turns out Shovel and Pail were following Gopher, who was taking them to a stream that makes a pretty sound. We decided to help. Our job was to figure out where Gopher was hiding by using our ears to listen for the sounds. We heard a puddle splash, a rustling in the leaves, and Gopher giggles in the hollow log. After a successful trip, Steve decided to not make any noise on his way back to the house so we could hear all the pretty sounds. There was a frog croaking and a cricket chirping. Then the viewer loudly spotted the second clue, which is a cloud. Steve wondered how Blue got a popcorn on the cloud. After the second clue was found, Steve hears another sound. It's mail time. Mailbox was showing Steve some funny sounds. The letters showed our friends playing a fun sound game. After saying goodbye, Steve hears yet another sound. It was Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper popping popcorn. It turned out it was movie time. The problem was they could not hear a thing. The movie had no sound. Mr. Salt tried to fix the problem, but he couldn't. He and Mrs. Pepper needed help. So Blue skidooed into the movie. Steve did too. Blue discovered some buttons that made sounds for the movie. All we had to do was match the right sound with the right picture. This was going to be a fun activity. First there was wind whooshing and a balloon breaking. Then there was a broom sweeping and a baby crying. Finally there was a truck vrooming and a happy baby giggling. Steve then realized we finished the whole movie. We watched and listened to the whole thing. It sounded great. Then the viewer spotted the third clue on the sound button. When Steve pushed it, the sound button made a sound of a boom. That's when Steve realized it was time to sit in the thinking chair. It was time to think. We were trying to figure out what Blue hears, and our clues were drops of water, a cloud, and a booming sound. Steve thought the drops of water were like rain that comes from a cloud and we hear a booming sound. The viewer said that's called a thunderstorm, which is what Blue hears. At that point, Steve realized we just figured out Blue's clues. It turned out Blue heard the storm coming before it was even here. Then Gopher, Shovel, and Pail come back to remind us how we helped them find the stream. Mr. Salt and Mrs. Pepper come back to remind us how we helped them fix the movie by adding all the cool sounds to it. Then everyone cuddled up in the blanket, ate some popcorn, and listened to the sounds of the storm. Steve noticed all the sounds were getting louder and faster. After a fun day of listening and figuring out the sounds, it was time to say so long, but sing just one more song. Now let's talk about the episode as a whole. I feel like kids can learn a lot if they want to learn more about figuring out sounds. It sure was a different episode. Usually there's bouncy music at the beginning and end, but it was also quiet. It gave me a feeling of wonder, you know? Because you wonder why there's no music and then something different happens. All you have to do is listen. All in all, it's a good episode. So yeah, that's Stop, Look, and Listen. If you'd like to play again, just go back to the beginning of this episode. And remember, you can do anything that you want to do. Bye!